Hey everybody, welcome back to Cram's session here. We're going to be taking a look at a Alice list and go over a couple of nuance type concepts around the idea of influence and defense tools. I think a couple episodes ago I did mention about Alice, how I felt Alice was going to be busted. Funny enough, she's kind of good, just not in the way that you might be thinking. So we're gonna go into a little bit about that, and then I kind of leave the deck the way it is and leave it up to you guys for any tweaks that anyone might want to make. I do apologize if I sound a little sick. It's because I am sick. Unfortunately, some kind of cold or flu's been going around, so I got hit with something. Took 2 days to get over it, and then a week later I got hit with another thing. So bear with me if my voice does sound a little nasally. So let's take a look at this list. This is Wind Alice. Oh, geez, excuse me. And you'll notice probably the two things that probably stand out that are a little weird. First being this condemned trinket, which just creates an omen, and not devouring malice. Shadow's twin. Uh, Definitely not normal. So this list is going to follow the same concept that the previous Alice list that I made, where about half the deck or a good chunk of the deck is Umbra and involves a lot of curses, healing, and whatnot. So let's dig into the main list and kind of go over what the theme of this deck is, or what the idea, how this deck's going to operate. We have 4 Blighted Jewel, Focus Round, Forest Cake, Mnemonic Charm. These 16 cards, if you've noticed, all have on enter to some capacity, draw a card, or draw a card into memory. Now, in the past, these resource neutral cards have seen, I would say, standard play. Force Cake obviously being used in Guoja, Mnemonic Charm being used in Rai, Kong Ming, I think Dao Chan, and even Arasana, and focusing round to a much, much lesser extent in Diana. More recently, some of the Win Diana lists, the Taser Lock Turbos. Now, Blighted Jewel hasn't really seen that level of play yet, but it follows the same theme. Now, the reason these cards are so useful is obviously because they're resource neutral lines. They help you level without going down in influence more than you otherwise would. But they also have other minor effects. Now, in terms of Grand Archive, your hand and your influence is actually your resources. So whenever you play things like Turbocharge, Creative Shock to pitch float, or pitch a liminal guide, you you either go resource neutral or you go what's called +1 in terms of resources. Um, Windmill Asen. Windmill draws a card into memory. Asen would put him back, or Reclaim would put Windmill back in your hand. And then you would play the Windmill again, so you've effectively gained another influence. There's been a lot of times in the history of the game where Wind, especially, has been able to utilize things like suppression, things like returning cards to your hand to kind of recur that influence back. I mean, even simple things like returning a dungeon guide back to your hand after you've played it. The dungeon guide on the field does not count as a resource because it's not in your hand. But once you put it back to your hand after it's done its job of leveling you up, you kind of get that influence back. So in previous win lists, there have been times where we try to loop certain things that have on enter effects that do replace themselves or do add cards. Actually, a perfect example of this right here is Zhang Jiao. Now, fractals use this obviously, I would say, the most effectively because it's so easy to draw 2 cards. But one of the things that Wind, when this card first came out, I know me personally, I was looking at this from a Wind perspective. Pre-rec, suppress the Zhang Jiao, recollect everything. I have nothing in my memory, and then have this come back at the end phase and draw 2 cards. But even further, you could do the same concept with Asins, Reclaims, and Snaring Fumes. Play this, maybe recover 4, maybe glimpse 4, or make your opponent discard a card from memory and then return it to your hand and then play it again. All those kinds of concepts have been around for a very long time, and it's been definitely a how do a value engine, but not, it hasn't really had that much oomph. It was usually like pulling teeth and it was kind of like jumping through hoops. Actually, a funny relationship would be that one meme where you have some guy like kind of jumping through hoops and everything and then landing on his feet and he's like, ta-da. And then right below it, you just have a guy who's just jumping forward. And it's like the complex one was wind value engines, and then the standard one was just like Creative Shock, your regular fire engines, or maybe even Watermill. But all that being said, Wind has now access to a card, Imperious Galebind, that effectively turns this complex value engine into a very simple and straightforward just play this card, get value. So this card is a new card from PTM. Suppress up to 3 target allies, items, or weapons. It is an exalted win card. Now, normally Zephyr would only suppress one thing. So if you Zephyred a unit like Zhang Zhao or just a replacement card like Forest Cake, it would draw you a card, sure, but you're still going 1 for 1 for that because you do pay the 1 card in the Zephyr to flicker something and then draw a card. So you're kind of resource neutral there, which is still not bad, don't get me wrong. But if we could pay 2 to do that to 3 items, if I spend 1 card to flicker 3 on enter draw cards, I just drew an additional 2 cards, which is absurd. That's even better than flickering a Zhang Zhao at 0 influence, once she comes back on your end phase. That's even better than that. So, just to give you an idea of just how powerful that can be, we all know how good Zhang Zhao is at drawing 2. Now imagine you're just drawing 3. And that's what we're looking at in this list here, and that's why we have 16 draw card effects. Now, I'm going to skip over some of the defense tools, and we're going to talk a little bit about this Imperious Galebind and why this card is so critical, the value that it generates, the importance of the influence it generates, and why in Alice specifically. So, first, let's go over about this Alice specific stuff. Why is Imperious Galebind, in my opinion, much, much stronger and going to be more prevalent in Alice lists, especially? Because she is level 2 advanced element. I think I did mention this before in the previous Cram session about Alice. Part of the reason I felt like she was busted was because it's a level 2 advanced element champion. That does not mean just because Umbra cards exist, she's good. Advanced element cards include exalted cards. And these exalted cards, as more come out, Alice will become stronger. So not only do we get to play this, how many cards do we have here? I think this is 26 Umbra cards. Not only do we get to play these Umbra cards, we also get to play any Exalted cards that we want to play much, much sooner than other level 3 decks would play. So, again, thinking in terms of influence, when you level from your Spirit to a level 3 champion, assuming no Dungeon Guide and assuming there's no Creative Shocks or anything like that, you lose 1 influence by banishing to go to level 1, 2 influence by banishing to go to level 2, and 3 influence by banishing to go to level 3. That is a total of 6 influence lost on your way up to level 3. And that's assuming resource neutral plays. Because obviously if you're leveling up by putting 3 down in memory to play a resolute stand, that's not that's not a resource neutral line. So you're losing 6 to get to level 3 and you're taking 3 turns to do so. So by the time you do hit level 3, depending on if you're first or second, Serene Spirit, yada yada, depending on how that plays out, you end up level 3 with like 4 or 5 cards in your as influence, which might not be a lot to play your advanced element cards, play your other cards you want to play, unless your name is Crux and you can spend 2 for a Ghost of Pendragon, but that's Crux. So Alice being only 2 turns of leveling to 1 and then leveling to 2, you only lose 3 cards. So that means you now have about 7 cards in hand the moment you hit your advanced element, your end game here. So she has a much smoother and cleaner path to get there. She gets there faster. She doesn't take as many materializations or influence. So you get to capitalize on these advanced element cards like Galebind. Now, these Umbra cards, I think, are just standard Alice stuff like Abnegation, Maledictum Vitae, and then Umbrasites, and then Reflected Blights. Obviously, you kind of want these curses so you don't take the lot of damage from Alice. Obviously, when you take 7 Unpreventable, you kind of don't want to keep taking 7 Unpreventable, so you do have to make sure you do play a curse. But once you have that curse in there, you're smooth sailing off to the races. So the idea is you get to level 2 immediately, and then we start spamming cards like Galebind to draw more cards, and then using cards like Condemned Trinket, Reflected Blight to get Galebind back in a way. Reflected Blight will put it back into your memory, and Grim Pastiche, if it's an omen, this is a spell action. It's a or it's a, I think it's a 5 cost cap on Grim Pastiche. Yes, 5 cost. When you omen it, you can Grim Pastiche it. So we have a lot of ways to utilize this card that's going to draw us a bunch of influence. So now let's get into why this influence matters so much and defense tools and how this is going to play out. Normally, if I were to blank a turn from my opponent, or um, let's say use a defense tool or a wall, or stunt my opponent's turn, usually those cards like Resolute Stand, like Vanish from Sight, are what's considered a -1. You play the card, you do not replace it, so you've effectively lost that influence. A lot of times, decks that are like going to level 3 and kind of need to play these fogs to blank your opponent's turn, they will do so in a way that they can go backup charger, blank your turn. And because they're blanking your turn going -1, the backup charger, the GCR, the baubles, whatever it is, has kind of become that -1, if that makes sense. Rather than leveling up, you're getting a GCR or something that draws you a card so that you can then go -1 to play a Resolute Stand or play a Vanish from Sight. And then next turn, do it again and do it again and do it again. The reason that that worked was because you were drawing an extra, you're drawing your standard card for turn. So if I draw a card for turn, I draw a card for my bauble. I've drawn 2 cards in the turn, and I go -1. Oh, geez, -1, -1 to play my Resolute Stand Vanish. I still have that extra card because I chose to draw 2 cards that turn. So if I do this for, let's say, 2 turns in a row, I'm gaining more resources. It keeps going on. I'm gaining more resources so that when I do choose to level to 3, I have more resources to play. I'm not losing my big, end game cards, advanced element cards. I think you might be seeing Luxem maybe at your locals or regionals or store champs. Luxem would be a good example of this, where they might just take a turn off just to get a backup charger because they do not want to lose their Luxem cards. But what they'll do for sure is play that Vanish from Sight on your recollection and be like, I'm fine with taking a turn off. I'll get 2 cards this turn, play a Vanish from Sight, and then I'll level up. So that's kind of the idea, or the core concept around playing defensive tools. You lose a resource to blank a turn. So imagine a world where you can only be level 2. Again, you already have high influence, and you play a card that draws you 3 cards. So rather than play your baubles, your backup chargers to draw an additional 1 card so you can play your defense tools, we're playing things like Galebind to draw 3 cards, effectively going +2, and then going -1 to play our defense. This extra resource is just from that Galebind. This does not include any draws from Regalia, draws for the turn. So you can imagine that's a lot of extra resources that we're gaining here. So the idea is you draw a bunch of cards, you blank your opponent's turn using Resolute Stand, Vanish from Sights, and Slip Away, which is an imbue card that gives you stealth and Spell Shroud. And you amass all this influence each turn, because it's not just one turn that this happens. If I Galebind during my turn, stuff comes back during my end phase, I draw 3. I also have cards like Umbrasight, I have cards like Turbocharge, I have Draw Card Regalia, like in the case of Backup Charger, Thurible, and Lost Providence. I have all these additional cards that I'm just going to go to my next turn, draw a bunch more cards again, blank my opponent's turn, go to my turn, draw a bunch of cards again. and just keep repeating this process. So that sounds, now that we've kind of like laid out the foundation of stalling, fogs, blanking your opponent's turn, resources, let's get into how we can win. So obviously this deck, we're drawing a bunch of cards, we're blanking our opponent's turn. How do we win? Well, we have all this influence. What can we do with it? Spirel. Spirel has an effect that on enter deal 3, and you can banish a card from memory face down, and then pay 2 to turn her sideways to use her effect. You do not need to negate a card to do the effect. The negation is just an added benefit. So you can imagine if I play Spirel, put a card underneath, deal 3 damage. I will tap her, pay 2 to tap her, reveal the card, deal 3 to my opponent, and then re-trigger her on enter. So we'll deal 3, and then we choose not to banish a card from memory. Because what we're going to do is we're going to play Galebind. We're going to suppress her, and we're going to suppress 2 cards that draw us cards when they come back. So at our end phase, they'll all come back. Spirel's on enter will trigger, deal 3 damage. Put a card from memory under her, or banished for her. Trigger the on enter draw cards. We'll draw 2 cards. We'll pay 2, tap Spirel. We'll deal another 3 damage. We just dealt 12 damage in our turn alone. And even further, we could suppress her on our opponent's turn. She'll come back awake on our opponent's end phase. So what we're going to do is amass 13, 14, 15 influence. And then we're going to play Spirel and just keep activating that effect, baby. Suppressor, player, it's like bop it, twist it, pull it, tap it. Spirel is going to hit her opponent for 3 a lot. So that's how we win with this. Now that, again, might take some time. Again, we can max deal about 12 damage in one turn, and assuming no spell shot, obviously she's got a target, so she's got to target your opponent. But the idea is we can do that while playing defense tools like Slip Away, Topsy Decree, Vanish, Resolute on our opponent's turn, because we're drawing so many cards from this wind value engine in Galebind and other methods, like I said, with backup charger, Umbra Sights, etc. So we might not have to tap out to play Spirel as many times as I just listed. That might just be 6 cards to do that. That's a drop in the bucket when your hand is 14 cards. So that's kind of the idea behind the deck. There's a couple of fluff cards and unique tools, like in the case of Regal Inquisition, Unbroken Mustang, and Zhang Jiao, that you might want to flicker for more recovery, or ripping your opponent's memory, or destroying zero-cost regalia or items. And then obviously things like Nocturne's Oblivion. Um, the other thing is, because we're playing Focusing Round, we also have Shadow's Twin. Shadow's Twin gets +2 attack when we load it. So what that means is we can materialize this, again, sooner than maybe other decks would their, end game weapons. And while also flickering Focus Round to draw a card, we can load Focusing Round into our Twin Shadow pre-rec, and Twin Shadow will get +2 attack, so it has 3 base, and then it has a 2 attack bullet. So we'll just turn sideways, hit for 5. We have so many draw cards here that it's okay to use Focusing Round for damage. We don't need to keep it there if we've got, 4 Forest Cakes out. So that's extra damage that we don't need Spirel for, or it's just tied in next to Spirel. So it's a little more oomph. And there's other things you can do, like you can go for like a Grand Soniere, even though this deck doesn't really run omens other than this Condemned Trinket. You can also run things like Fleetfoot Filly. That's a horse that is a 3-cost 2/2 that gets a buff counter whenever something gets suppressed. So when you go for your turn to maybe spam Spirel, a Galebind by itself is going to suppress 3 things. That Fleetfoot Filly is going to get 3 buff counters just from this. So you can imagine the absurdity that can get. So there's a couple ways you can do it. Something else to consider with this deck, because again, we are drawing so many cards, we're blanking our opponent's turn. Because we do run Condemned Trinket, we could opt for Advent of the Stormcaller and Oblation. Oblation does cost 5 because we're not CL, but we could pay 5 because we have 14 freaking cards in our hand and go for that method, so we can kind of do like an Oblation Alice. But these are all, alternative win cons that you can do. But I think Spirel and Shadow's Twin is just enough because you do have to balance the resource defenses and you're spending your resources on killing your opponent. So that is the list. That is some of the ideas and fundamentals of resources and value engines, and why it's important for playing your defensive tools, drawing cards, especially in Wind, and how they do it. I will scroll down to show a little bit of the sideboard here. This is just cards that I have thought about. Your Wind, so you get Noble Disillusion. Your Alice, so Tricastles is pretty good. Half your deck doesn't care about this. So just a couple of extra cards in here that something to think about. But that is the list. I will tell you, just as a little bit of a competitive player edge for you guys for obviously watching this. This deck is really good. This deck, when I first played it against Oblation CL, I remember I played. This was solo testing, so I was playing both sides of the decks here. I played Oblation 3 times in a single turn to deal 15 damage, and I still could not kill this deck. This deck is very good in testing. It is beating Guoja. It is beating certain decks of CL. It is beating allies. It is beating just about everything that I can throw at it. It does have pain points. I'm not going to tell you what they are. That's for you guys to figure out. I think this is going to surprise everybody at the next descent. So have fun with it. Tinker with it. Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you in the next one.